Entriamo nel vivo di questo Gem Talk e cedo la parola appunto a Rui, che vi parlerà di una parte secondo me molto affascinante, e soprattutto per chi tratta le gemme ricordatevi che non vi dovete mai dimenticare la storia che hanno le gemme, perché è quella che può fare la differenza quando si propone al consumatore finale una gemma, e quindi cedo volentieri la parola a Rui.
Grazie mille. Mi senti tutti? Ok, grazie mille. Buon pomeriggio a tutto il mondo. Io non parlo italiano, quindi vuoi parlare la presentazione in inglese. Capisci o non capisci? Va bene. So, I'm here to talk in English about the history of ruby. And it's very hard to, in half an hour, to tell you about a millionaire story of one of the most fascinating gemstones in history, which is ruby. But after thinking a while, I selected a few parts of ruby history that I will be sharing with you, and some actually have nothing to do with rubies, but we will get there. How many geologists are on the floor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and gemologists? So I must be careful so I don't say anything wrong. It's good to know. So, is it working? Funziona o non funziona? Va bene. Bravo. I think maybe this is the one.
No,
But I will use both. For those of you that are geologists, you know this word, corundum. For those of you that are not geologists, you look at corundum and you say, that's an ugly name, and it is, but that's maybe. No, I have to be me. Okay. Signori tecnici, non funziona. Maybe made in some country that doesn't. Okay, good. So, back again, sorry about that. So, for those of you that know this word, it's a normal geology, mineralogy word. For those of you that are jewelers, you see corundum and you see the chemical formula, and this is very boring, okay? But this is science. Ruby is a corundum, okay? And there you go, a very nice ruby specimen, a ruby crystal on marble, on white marble. Collectors, they pay a lot of money to have such a crystal. And this is actually a corundum, a red corundum. But corundum also occurs in other colors. And the colors of corundum are all of those. And many of you already know that those colors on corundum, we call them sapphires. So sapphire and ruby are the same thing. Maybe all of you knew about this, but they are the same thing. The only difference is color. The only difference is the name. If we pick up the word sapphire, it stands for blue. Originally, blue sapphires were called sapphires. In Latin, sapphire had another meaning, but in the old days, blue sapphires were called only sapphires. Then yellow sapphires had another name, but now we call them yellow sapphire. If it is green, green sapphire. Pink, pink sapphire. Red, not red sapphire, ruby. It's the only corundum color that it is not called a sapphire. So sapphire and ruby, the same thing. They only are different in color. They are only different in name. And this is a lovely specimen of a sapphire, a Patparacha sapphire. Maybe some of you know what it is. It's do you know that color of sunlight in 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the summer, where we see orange and pink? That's Patparacha. It's beautiful, and historically used to come from Sri Lanka. Now it comes from other sources. And we also, everything like that is corundum, and you can see a very small spot, that's a ruby. And again, now in cut stones, sapphires and a lovely ruby. So this is to say that ruby and sapphire is the same thing. And for those of you that didn't know that, now you know. And this is important. Should we call it sapphire, a pink sapphire, or a red ruby? Because rubies are red. But we mentioned that sapphires can be pink. Where do we draw the line? If you are selling, a pink sapphire can be a ruby. If you are buying, that's a pink sapphire. I think you understand. But if you are not buying nor selling, you need to have a boundary. And there is no international boundary. And one of the reasons, there are many reasons, one of the interesting reasons is how do you perceive color. If you use different lightings, you will have different perceptions of the color. So, like in diamonds, if you want to make sure that you are looking at a color consistently, you must have variables of the observation that are the same, namely the type of lamps, the intensity of the lamps, the color distribution of those lamps, the temperature of the color of those lamps, the distance between the lamp and the sample, the distance between yourself and the sample, a lot of things. And all of a sudden you have a standard, and all of a sudden you can say that anywhere in the world you are looking at the same thing. That you can do. But convincing everybody in the world that in some boundaries there, sapphires from pink sapphires and ruby, that's very difficult because money. For some, they want pink sapphires, some pink sapphires to be called ruby, and some theoretical gemologists like myself, we say, no, that's pink, that cannot be a ruby. So but that keeps us going. And the SSCF has a standard. You know SSCF, the laboratory? Gubelin has a standard. All the laboratories have a standard. IGI has a standard to know exactly what is called what. But this is an interesting discussion. Is this a ruby or a pink sapphire? Because pink and red are the same color. It's the same. If you see the color wheel, pink and red are the same. And so you have a very nice Cartier ring with a corundum. Would you call it sapphire or ruby? If you are buying, you call it sapphire, okay? If you are selling, it's a ruby, but actually it's a pink sapphire. Red, really red corundum, that's the real ruby, okay? So we covered already two topics. Sapphire and ruby are the same material, and there is a boundary. Where do you start? Each laboratory has their own standard. There is no international standard for boundary situations. Interesting thing, the name ruby has been used for other stones. Let me go into the stage, otherwise you don't see me. And the name ruby has been used for many other materials, red gem materials. And you see there garnets, you see tourmalines, you see other materials. Because ruby, the word ruby stands for red. When we study very old documents, we study this very old manuscript by Marbod or Marbodus, I don't know how to pronounce it, not even in English. He was a writer, and he mentioned Bohemian ruby. And Bohemian ruby are the very strong red garnets from current-day Czech Republic. They were very famous in medieval ages, very famous in jewelry in the 19th century during the Victorian period. But the old guys, they would call it Bohemian ruby to those stones. We all know they are not rubies, but they were called that way. The real rubies, they were called Oriental rubies because they came from Orient, from Europe. They came from Asian countries. And there was another name, Balas ruby. And that was very valuable. That was very famous. And even crown jewels like the Portuguese crown jewels and the Austrian crown jewels, they used to have Balas rubies. And what are Balas rubies? And there are many orthographies, many ways of writing Balas. Balas rubies are those. Some of you know what they are, but they are not rubies. They are spinels. Who knows what a spinel is? Io puoi fare la traduzione simultanea, però ma no traduzione. Mister, no translation? Oh, now is translation. Can you wear it again? Good. What language do you want? Swahili, please. Good. Fantastic. So who hasn't heard about Spinel before? Everybody knows Spinel. Oh, wow. Very strong audience. So Spinels, they were very, very popular. But they were not called Spinel. Spinel is a modern name. They were called rubies. Balas rubies. And this is a very famous stone from today's Tajikistan. Is there anybody here from Tajikistan? There is one on the back. Of course, there is not, but you can look. I'm just performing. And very, 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 very important historical site for Spinels. And by the way, that's Richard Hughes, renowned gemologist from Thailand. And he's standing on Tajikistan. On the other side, we have Afghanistan. And for millennia, for centuries, big, and when I say big, I say 50 carats, 100 carats, like the size of a ping pong ball, Spinels came from this place. It's the only place in the world where really pink to red Spinels come in really big sizes consistently. Of course, you can have in Tanzania some big Spinels, but here you really have consistent historical sourcing of big red Spinels. And they were called balas because on the old days, that region was called Badakistan, or Balashia, if you want to speak in other language. That's why the rubies were the rubies or the red stones from Balashia, balas. That's it. By the way, bala in Brazilian is it's a candy. In Portuguese, is a bullet. So I don't know what the same name in Portuguese from Brazil and Portuguese from Portugal. One kills you and the other sweetens you. But it's interesting. Do you know this crown? Queen Elizabeth II, she uses it when she goes to the English Parliament. Is there any English people here? Okay, good, now I can say it. English, of course, this is being videotaped, I cannot do jokes. English Parliament, she goes there once a year. And she wears that crown. That crown has one very famous diamond, the Cullinan diamond, 312 carats. The internally flawless diamond. Not internally flawless, almost. And there is a red, big red stone over there. And the name of that stone is the Black Prince Ruby. It's not a ruby, it's a Spinel. Because rubies of that size, and we are talking 170 carats approximately, it's really huge. And for a ruby, it's enormous. And for a Spinel, it's big but not enormous. And this is a Spinel. And can you see even on the back, on the top of that red Spinel, a brighter red stone, a cabochon? It's a ruby on a gold bezel covering the hole of a drill, because the Spinel had a drill. It was drilled. Un furo, come si dice italiano? Furo? Because in the old days in the Orient, they used to drill stones. And there is a ruby there covering the hole. And if you look at both colors, when you have rubies and Spinels together, they are red, but they are not the same red. Do you see what I mean? This is only one example. Of course, you can have red Spinels that look like red rubies, but on this case, they do not. And the Spinels from Tajikistan, their color tend more for this purplish, pinkish purplish, or pinkish red than to the bright reds. Another very famous ruby, the Timur ruby, also on the British crown jewels. Really huge, approximately 350 carats. Another one, is there anybody from Russia here? So, Imperial Crown of Russia, big Spinel, biggest than the English. You have a bigger one than the English, which is good. Really huge Spinel. If you go to Tehran, there is an even bigger one in the Tehran treasure in the Bank of Iran. And if you follow auction houses, you must have seen the Altani collection sale. I think it was on Christie's, exactly. They sold many of those 400 jewels from the 6,000 collection. They sold just a little bit. They made millions. And some of those red rubies, they were actually spinels. This is to say that spinel actually has been given ruby a famous and very remarkable name, because historically the name ruby was also attributed to this gemstone that has nothing to do with ruby. It's a spinel, totally different gem material, but the name was the same. Do you know the Hope diamond, the blue Hope diamond? It was from a very poor man called Hope that collected gemstones. And he also had other gemstones like the Hope pearl, a huge chrysoberyl, sapphires, and also this one, a remarkable spinel from Tajikistan, which in his collection, it's not called spinel, it's not called Balas ruby, it's called, spinel ruby. Another name for a spinel, but the name ruby is there, because ruby for ages was not the ruby that we know today, was red stone. Okay, now we have many things that we learned today. Corundum is the ugly name that when it's red is ruby, when it is not red, it's a sapphire. We also learned that there is a boundary between pink and red, and we must know exactly what it is. And we also learned that many rubies in history, they were not rubies, some were garnets, remarkably those from the Czech Republic, from Bohemia, and also the spinels, especially those from Tajikistan. But we also have spinels in Tanzania, remarkable spinels in Myanmar, in Mogok stone tract. The colors are different, even the Mogok material is bright red, is vivid bright red, it's beautiful spinels, but smaller in sizes. The biggest one are the ones from Tajikistan, so far. And why the hell, I mean, you came here to listen about ruby. And until now I didn't say almost nothing about ruby. Why the hell am I talking about spinel? And there is a reason. And you will remember this. Because they both historically shared the same name. Most famous rubies that you saw a couple. The Hope Spinel ruby. The Timur ruby, the Black Prince ruby. They are not rubies, they are spinels. And because the name ruby as a mineral variety of corundum is only late 18th century. So it's very new, relatively. This is why I mentioned spinels. And you can go home and say, I went to a ruby talk listening about spinel. And then the wife or the husband asks, what is spinel? And now you know now you know what to say. So, good. Let's move on. Now we are going to talk about the real rubies. And we are going to dive into the sources, the very old sources. And by the way, for those of you that are mineralogists, this is a remarkable specimen. It's really lovely. You see, maybe on the back you cannot see, you see a couple of old jewelry with small red stones. Traditionally, the real ruby, the oriental rubies, they were, and they still are, small. There is no problem about being small, but they are really small. In crown jewels of Portugal, as you can see here, rubies are small. Traditionally, and I repeat, the rubies that came from the mines in the Orient, the majority of them were small in size. Occasionally, you would have bigger sizes, but they were, and they still are, really very rare. Rubies above in good quality, above certain carat weights, back on this day and still today are really, really very rare. And those of you that work with rubies, you know, if you have a client saying, I want a fine quality 5-carat ruby, you can be happy because you are going to make a good profit because they are expensive, but they are very hard to find. If they are not heated, if they are from Mogok in Myanmar, they are really hard to find. Even in the old days, this is a jewel on a Portuguese museum, and you see a lot of red stones. And the bigger one over there is not a ruby. The other are rubies. When they didn't have money to buy a bigger ruby, they would buy spinels. Because spinel was not a substitute of ruby. It was a gemstone by itself, as we saw. But sometimes it would serve a purpose of pretending to be a ruby. Also on this piece, the big red stone over there. They couldn't afford a ruby. So they bought a pink topaz, a Brazilian pink topaz, and they put a red foil back in the back so it looks like red. This is to demonstrate or to convey the message that rubies traditionally they are small. When they become big, they become expensive, and sometimes so expensive that even the jeweler could not afford and would use something else. Like today, you have the glass-filled rubies that you can find in 20 carat, 30 carat stones, but they are not expensive. But they are not real rubies per se. Look at this picture. You have a big sapphire, you have rose-cut rubies, diamonds, and you have 4 rubies. And when you look at those rubies, you see asymmetrical shapes. It's not like a rectangle. It's like, you see? The shapes are not regular. And there is a reason. Those are like 2 to 3 carat rubies each. Quite large for a ruby. Natural color, no heat. Late 17th century piece. And rubies were so expensive on those days as they are today that the cutters, they didn't want to lose much carat weight when they were cutting. So they would cut along the shape of the rough. If you know, do you understand what I'm saying? So each of the 4 rubies, they look different. Not because the cutters were incompetent, but precisely the contrary. They were very competent. They knew that they could get much more money with big size rather than symmetrical size or symmetrical proportions. Today, the modern consumer thinks differently. Some of you know that in Sri Lanka, they are changing, moving from traditional cutting that cuts very irregular asymmetrical stones to more precise cutting because profits are better. Even old stones are being recut into nice symmetrical shapes. But on those days, symmetry was not important. Important was size. Yeah. Sorry, I have to. Well, technology sometimes. Okay. This is just for you to look at this piece of jewelry. Look at the size of the big emeralds, big sapphires, big diamonds. This is in Portugal. We haven't sold it yet. It's a big, big cross. Really a nice piece of jewelry. So, where do rubies come from? We have in our minds that rubies come from the Orient. And the most important historical source for rubies is today's Myanmar, that used to be known as Burma. And before that, it was known as the Kingdom of Pegu. But it's all the same thing. And the particular area where rubies came from and still come from is not one mine, it's a whole region, very large, extensive region with many gem occurrences where you can find many gemstones, including ruby. And those rubies from Myanmar, from Burma, gave ruby a very, very high standard. So high standard that today we say that is a Burmese ruby. Maybe you know the word Burma ruby. I don't know in Italia how do you say Burmese ruby, but it's from Burma? Yes, it's from Burma, Myanmar. That's very good. But the important mine or the important mining area was called Mogok. Blah, blah, blah. This is a real treasure. Almost 200 carats ruby. This is really rare. Really, really rare. If you ever go to Los Angeles, go to the Natural History Museum, this crystal is in there. It's one of the best rubies ever found. It's a monster. 200 carats for a ruby, it's like unthinkable. It's like in natural pearls from Bahrain, you seeing a 13 millimeter one, and in Jewelry Arabia a couple of months ago, a fisherman was showing a 13 millimeter natural pearl from the Gulf. That's an absolute treasure, once in a lifetime, like a 200 carat ruby. This is outstanding. In spinels, not the same. In red spinel, you can have 200, 300, 400. The big brands, the big designer brands from Paris, from all over the world, they used to use large Mogok Burmese rubies in their creations, not only consistently in color like Van Cleef, in the visible mystery setting, and as the other brands like Harry Winston, Graf, Boucheron, Cartier, blah, 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 whatever you want. Rubies were actually, the best ones were actually from Burma. But in the 90s, in Burma, in Myanmar, a big mine was discovered with a lot of rubies. But those rubies, they were not bright red. They had a bit of blue. So they were blue and red. And you know when you mixture blue with red, you have purple. And look at this. This is how the material comes from the mine. And then you do something that many of you know how to do, which is cosmetics. Who doesn't wear cosmetics in the room? I mean, not today, but when we go to television, we use. So it's something that you do to something to make it look better, which is okay. And this is the result. It's called a treatment. We call it a heat treatment because, I mean, you go to the beach, you go to the heat treatment to become more beautiful. Everybody does it. So we also do it. But that goes away. This heat treatment is permanent. So rubies, they are heat treated. The Mongshu, this mine rubies, are heat treated, so they become a better color. But they also come from Burma, and they are also Burmese rubies. But we were saying that historically the name Burmese rubies stand for very rare, the very valuable rubies from Mogok. Not anymore. That's why today, if you want to mention the valuable Mogok original Burmese rubies, you say classical Burma, which is the classical color from Burma. And you also have the same name from classical Kashmir for blue sapphire, a lot of wording for the material. But this is important. When you say Burmese ruby, it can be from Mogok, historical mines, really important, but they can also be from Mongsu, from that mine that produces the purple material that goes to the beach, has some sun. The treatment is not done on the beach, it's on a special thing, but changes color with the treatment. So you have both. Also historically, and I'm, how many minutes do I have? Loredana? Oh, I can speak what? Okay, 2 hours. And another important source in antiquity was Afghanistan. And we see very old writings, and we see the region of Jagdalek in Afghanistan as an important ruby source. And we also have Siam. Siam was Cambodia and Thailand. And even today, Thailand has a limited production of both rubies and sapphires. And the Portuguese traders that travel to the Orient in the 16th century, we call those rubies Siam rubies. And they had a different color. They were not bright red as the Burmese ones. They had a more, let us say, orangey tone. They were not bright red. Why? Because they had one more ingredient inside that changed the color. They had more iron. And most of you might know, and if you don't know, I explain, it's very easy. Some minerals like corundum, if they are pure, they are colorless. But if they have chemical impurities, they might change the color. For instance, chromium gives reds. Iron and titanium, blue. Iron can also give the yellow or the green. And you have many other mechanisms of color. Like when you are cooking, if you want to do yellow rice, you use, what is to say? Saffron. If you want red, you use tomato, pomodoro. If you want brown, you just burn it, and it goes brown. So depending on the ingredients that you use, the garlic, and you can have many colors in the rice. The same with minerals. With some minerals, with some ingredients, you change the color. And here, it has chromium because it's red, but it has iron. And iron puts the color more to the orangey, and it loses that brilliance red. For those of you that are gemologists, the fluorescence goes down. Loredana, she knows much more about it. And you see that the photograph is not the best, but the color of traditional Cambodia Thai rubies is different than the traditional Burmese or Vietnamese, if you want, material. You also have Sri Lanka also produces nice rubies, particularly the star rubies, the rubies with asterism, with that optical effect that works well with only one source of light, with a very strong beam like the sun. You see a 6 ray. And you also have sapphires with that kind of effect. Many other sources produce rubies today. I'm not going to speak about all of them, but I could not leave here without speaking about some African sources like Tanzania. And this is a specimen from Longido. And actually you have here on, Matthias has a real stone. From that kind of material you can do carvings. And for ages, Africa as a source of ruby was considered like, okay, African rubies, they are carving or cabochon quality. Africa does not or did not produce faceting quality rubies. And that kind of jewelry, the cabochons in rubies, most of them came from Africa. But today, and you see the chronology of the findings in Africa, we see a production of faceting quality ruby, namely in Tanzania and of course in Madagascar and of course in Mozambique. And fine quality rubies are not only an Asian product anymore. And since 2009, that rubies it began with not very good quality like this one. This is carving, or it's good for glass filling. But they discovered huge, when I say huge, it's tons of fine quality rubies. And a big company, multinational, has implanted itself there. It produces a lot, and it sells everything in Singapore, in special auctions. And some of those rubies are comparable in quality, in visual quality, with the finest Burmese material. They really look very, very nice. And from rough to cut, this was a photograph from Lotus Gemology. And I mean, we can see jewelry pieces like this. It was sold for almost $3 million, including the wood in the back. They sold everything. This one, a pair, and to make a pair, it's very, very hard. Like marriage, it's very hard to make a good pair. To have a matching pair in rubies on such a size. Look, 14 carats, that's huge for a ruby. And the other one is 13 carats. Of course, for those of you that are jewelers, you can make a pair that if you wear it in the earrings, you have a pretty or ugly face in the middle. If it is a pretty face, nobody sees the earrings. If it is on me, only sees the earrings. But when you have it on your window, side by side, sometimes you need to have it matching, both in color, in brilliance, that has to do with the cut, and also in size and shape. And to have it in rubies, in that quality, in that size, with that bright red, is exceedingly rare. That's why it's sold for $6 million. $6 million, it's, I mean, Cristiano Ronaldo just spent $7 million on an apartment in Lisbon. It's nothing. I could not live here I could not leave L-E-A-V-E, go away from this room without speaking about historical rubies in the geological sense. Because we were talking about historical or history in rubies in the human sense of the word. And you have in Greenland very, very old geological rubies. The oldest deposit of rubies in the world geologically is in Greenland. Maybe that's why Trump wanted to buy the island. I don't know. It has a lot of rubies. Look at the picture. You both see pink sapphire and ruby. And where do you draw the line? That's an interesting discussion when you are selling, even more interesting if you are buying. Most rubies from Greenland are cabochon quality. They are not cut quality, but they are really interesting. And the most interesting selling point for them is the fact that they are really very old, 2.7 billion years. It's 2,700 million years. Do you know how much is a million? Some of you know in euros, but a million mathematically. If you give a job to somebody, if you have 1 million euros and you have 1,000 coins, 1 million coins of euro, you give a job to somebody and say, you have to verify and to count 1 million euros in coins. You work 8 hours a day. Do you know how many days he will be working for you, counting 1 million, 8 hours a day? 1.5 months. So 1 million is a lot. Imagine 2.7 thousand million, which is billions in American. It's a huge, very old, older than me. It's really, really old. Conclusions. I'm finishing. Rubies have been used for centuries, okay? In Myanmar, Burma, the Mogok, that one that makes I didn't say the word pigeon blood, but the bright red rubies traditionally used to come from there. Sri Lanka, of course, Thailand and Cambodia, which is Siam, and Afghanistan. Not a big source, but important historically. And I think you will remember this. They share the same name with spinel, and they were very rare in large sizes. Rubies, normally they are small, which is behind the word size doesn't matter. But in rubies, normally they are small. When you have a big one, wow, that's a museum, very high quality one, especially, and you saw the example, a pair with big size quality rubies, you saw the value, 6 million. Woo, it's really expensive. And Mozambique, some of you already knew, some of you didn't know, Asia is not the largest producer of rubies anymore. It's Mozambique. That was famous for aquamarine, for tourmaline, for quartz, and now the largest producers of gem quality ruby in the whole planet. And this is interesting. And to finish up, just a few magnificent examples. This is the Baroda ruby choker. It was sold from the Altani collection a few months ago. And etc. Ruby, 6 carats, 3.3 million. The Chaumet ruby, 32 carats, 6.7 million. The Sunrise ruby, 25 carats, 30 million. Yeah, 30 million. It's less than Cristiano Ronaldo. And of course, the Graf ruby, remarkable ruby, remarkable. It looks like a synthetic ruby, but it's real. And it was sold a couple of years ago for almost 8.5 million, but in a very, let me say, not very beautiful ring in 2006 was sold for half the price. So you can see that very high quality rubies. In the last 15 years, the prices skyrocketed, meaning that ruby is one of the rarest gemstones on earth. Has been like that for ages. Rubies were so valuable that you remember that even the cut was not perfect because size was an important factor, because they were really rare in big sizes. And this necklace, it was a necklace by Faidi. It took reportedly 100 years to collect. Every ruby is the finest quality. It has a lot of rubies, 60 rubies, exactly 100 carats. They are not very big, but they are always all matching in color, in clarity, in shape, in everything. It was sold for $10 million. Thank you very much. One thing. If you want to follow me on Instagram, that's over there. Or search my name or search like that. Okay, thank you very much. I had to do some publicity.